follow that.
Sorry if I didn't tell you about all those lyrics.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Give me a moment to pull myself together. Oh, yeah. We do have fun here, I got to tell you. So it's really funny. I'm doing a series on really classic Unity teachings, and, but really being who we are, being who we were sent here to be, maybe that may be one of the most classic teachings that we have. This Sunday, I want to talk about some of those things that in seminary, where they teach ministers to be ministers, is one of those really basic reasons that you guys have us around anyway. It's so that we can explain what we call matters of ultimate concern, right? Like where do we go when we die, and why do bad things happen to good people? And so in the second chapter of Lessons in Truth, which was really the first book ever published by Unity back around like 1904, 1906. In this particular chapter, what Emily Cady is talking about is really matters of ultimate concern. What and who is God? What and who are we as human beings? And, sometimes it's easier to talk about what things are by describing what they're not, right? And that's really, really helpful with this concept that we call God. And I have to go back to some of those things that we started thinking about God, almost 3,000 years ago in order to talk about what God is not. So if we go back to Genesis, right, the very first book in the Bible, which was written, we think, sometime around 2,700-ish years ago, somewhere in there. It's part of the oral tradition that came out of the Hebrew culture and is now part of the Hebrew scriptures. And of course, they had a different understanding of what those scriptures were. For those people, they really kind of understood this as simply a fable, a story, something that helped them understand those matters of ultimate concern, something that they could tell their kids when their kids ask them, so where did the world come from, Mommy and Daddy? Right? We tend to take things literally, at least since about the 18th century onwards, right? But if you try to take God literally as the dude that shows up in Genesis, you're going to have problems understanding it. I sure did, when I was first a kid. So it's like, here's this God guy who's apparently been hanging out in the dark for God knows how long, right? But before it, he in Genesis, but I usually refer to God as it, says, let there be, somebody turn on the lights, let there be light, okay? Let there be light. And then, oh, hey, that was pretty cool, so let's make a few other things. And in 1 week's time, manages to go from sitting there in the dark all by itself, to all the stuff, right? We got the universe, we got the galaxies, we got the suns, the moons, the stars, the planets, the plants, the critters, we even have a couple people hanging out in the garden by themselves, right? So God's got this thing set up where he's got this dude and he's got his girlfriend that he made out of a piece of the dude, which is kind of strange, but okay. It's a little incestuous, isn't it? Bit. But anyway, so he's got two people he's in charge of. They are in a garden that apparently has walls and a gate, right? Because a little later in the story, he sets an angel, and we don't know where they came from, right? Were they there in the dark with God before? We don't know. Doesn't say. He just says an angel, with a flaming sword, shows up at the gate. So if there's a gate, there must be some kind of fence or wall or something around this thing, right? So the way I imagine the Garden of Eden is kind of like a giant playpen, right? And God has put Adam and Eve in the giant playpen. It's like, okay, y'all stay in there and stay out of trouble and stay away from that tree right there, which is, of course, the first thing they head for, right? So then, at a certain point, God shows up and he says, hey, I was calling for y'all, I couldn't find you. What? You're God, right? You just made the whole creation in a week. You've got two people to keep track of in a playpen, and you lost them? Really? And that's like in the first chapter of the book. So I was having problems swallowing this whole thing from, the very beginning. And as it goes on, of course, we find a little bit more about the God that they told the stories about. So what we have to do is we have to look at those stories about God as simply being kind of a history of our understanding of what God might be like. All right? And we'll see a little bit that understanding has progressed, right, as time has gone by. However, that understanding of God as someone who is anthropomorphic, which means like a human, right, because those are very human things, right? I stuck my kids somewhere, I can't find them, right? Hey, I was calling for you and you didn't answer. What's up? I know y'all got in trouble. You were quiet. Bad things happened. Right? It's very anthropomorphic. And this idea of an anthropomorphic God, one that has human attributes, remains to this day. And it shows up not only in the way that we practice our religion or attempt to understand those matters of ultimate concern, but it also shows up in popular culture. And I've got an example of that from a movie that Barry's going to roll for us. So this is a little scene from Bruce Almighty when God decides to let Bruce try to be God and see just exactly how tough it is.
Well, you took the job, Bruce, so I suggest you get to it.
Seeing him smile would make me so happy.
Prayers, okay, prayers. This creepy whisper thing has to end. Organization and management. That's what I need. I need a system, something concrete. Concentrate. Files. Let all prayers be organized into files. Well, that takes care of the voices. Not exactly a space saver, though. Grace might notice. I know. Prayer Post-its! Okay, I need something with a lock. Security, combination, a password. A password?
You've got prayers.
Welcome to the Revelation Superhighway. We bless, no mess. Downloading now. It's good. It's good. This is gonna take a while. Oh. 1,527,503 prayer requests. I better manifest some coffee. Hola, Juan Valdez.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Disfruta un buen café.
Gracias, señor.
Adiós.
Adios. Now that's fresh mountain-grown coffee from the hills of Colombia. Okay, I had to have made some kind of a dent by now. Oh, come on! Oh! What a bunch of whiners. This is gonna suck up my whole life. You know what? Yes, to all! Yeah, there you go. Now everybody's happy.
And as if you have seen the movie and remember it, you'll remember that answering yes to all those prayers did not make everyone happy. For example, all the people that prayed to hit the lottery, I think they all got like 17 cents because they all prayed to hit the lottery. Right? That idea that God is somehow some guy who has this magical way of knowing what we need, and then he sits there and makes a value judgment based on whether we were naughty or nice, kind of like Santa Claus. And if we were good, we get what we pray for. And if we were naughty, we don't. That has persisted. And as you can see, that's still very close to some people's idea of what God actually is. So what we teach in Unity is that God is not a person who lives on a mountain, on a planet, somewhere in the sky, in the clouds, with angels flying around with little wings and, little cherub-type people, in a place that, and this is something, I've not quite managed to grasp, wrap my mind around. It's a place with clouds, but it has streets paved with gold. And there are gates, but it's made out of clouds. Haven't quite grasped how they managed to do all that. But anyway, God is not a guy that lives up there like that. We look at God as being principle. And my short version of that is simply this, that God is the universe, everything in it, all that lies behind it, and the laws by which it operates. Now, I'm going to start pulling out some words that might want to put you to sleep. So try to bear with me, because some of this is really basic theology. It's just that it's not something that we talk about a lot. So theists are people who believe in a God, like a God somewhere, like that dude, right, who might wear robes and have a beard and, the big G around the neck, or maybe be somebody like Thor with a hammer or Zeus with a lightning bolt, right, for the more violent among us, right? So that is a God who is a kind of a separate entity, separate from us, separate from the universe. They have their own deal going on. That's a theist would believe in that. An atheist does not believe in a God, right? We have some people, probably some people in here who, used to be atheists. Maybe you still are, right? Maybe this is the only church that you feel comfortable in. It's possible. I used to be an agnostic. Gnostic comes from the old word which means to know, right? And so when you say you're agnostic, you're just saying, I don't know, right? Which is actually, where I was between the time when I was probably about 16 and in my early mid-30s. I didn't know, and if I'm being completely honest, I still don't know a whole lot. After being in Unity churches for 25 years and going to seminary and studying this stuff, what I know is that what I don't know is a whole lot larger than what I do know. Shakespeare said it best, there is more in heaven and earth than is dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. And there is. So what I had to do is I had to come to some understanding of God, and for me, because I grew up in the Christian tradition, some understanding of this dude named Jesus that worked for me. Bottom line, they may not work for each and every one of you, and if there's anything that I say today that helps any of you come to a better understanding of the universe, right, those matters of ultimate concern, yay. But if I say stuff that you don't agree with, that is completely okay. And that's one of the things that I like about Unity, and that I've always loved about Unity, is unlike the tradition that I grew up in, where basically, if you weren't us, you weren't getting in, right? If you didn't believe the way we do, we were Protestants. I'll narrow it down that far. We weren't even sure Catholics were getting in, and they're like the first Christians. Hello, right? The Holy Roman Catholic Church, right? They started this thing. Okay, like the Pope, the guy in Rome. In Unity, we're more omnistic, which means that we honor all religions, all paths to God, because we understand God as being all. God is in all. All is pressed out from God. In John, in the 4th chapter, the 24th verse, Jesus says, he's talking to this woman, and he's trying to explain to her what God is. And he says, God is spirit, and we must worship him in spirit and truth. And that's a pretty good pointer, especially for the Gospel of John, which has issues. one thing we have to understand is when we quote from Jesus, we also have to place him in his place and time. We have to put him in context. So one of the things that we look at, and this is just kind of a historical sidebar, is when Jesus says God is spirit, he's also saying something that God is not. Can anybody guess what that is? He's not human. And I think I heard the word. He's not Caesar. Okay? So for him to say that was both pointing this lady in the right direction theologically, but also he was kind of making a little political dig there, right? That guy, the Caesar that sits on the big throne over there, yeah, that's not God, even though everybody says he is, right? But if we take a look at what spirit is, and Emily Cady quotes Webster, spirit, among the other definitions of it, is that thing that life comes from. It almost reminds me of Obi-Wan and Yoda's definition of the Force, that it's that power that life stems from and that life sustains, right? But even things that we would not generally conceive of as being alive, they're part of God. Even the rocks and the dust that's floating around out in outer space. We wouldn't say that those things are alive, but they're still an expression of God pressed out into being. They are still a manifestation of God energy. Does that make sense? So if we look at God as not only all things, but where all things came from, and I know that there are a lot of people in this town, and many of them are sitting right in here, who are very scientifically minded. We have UAB, all the colleges and the medical school and all those type folks. It's like, I want some proof. I want some data. I want something that I can hang my hat on here, I love science. I'm very interested in it. I'm kind of a geek, actually. And I'm also I'm not just into physics, I'm into metaphysics, those things that we think of as being out beyond science. But what really fascinates me is those places where the two kind of intersect a little bit. Now, Charles Fillmore, who was one of the founders of Unity, I think may have gone a bit too far because he really hung his hat on the science of the day. And if there's one thing that we know about science is that the stuff that we are really sure about today, probably going to somebody's going to prove that wrong tomorrow or next year or 100 years from now. I remember reading at one point that back in the day, scientists and mathematicians proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that if the human body was forced to travel faster than 60 miles an hour, it would be crushed. Right? So I'm willing to bet that a couple of you might have been crushed on your way here this morning. One or two, right? There are so many things that we don't know. And I've talked about this before, where, when we look at just the electromagnetic spectrum and what a tiny portion of it we're actually able to see with our eyes, right? So even now, over there in France and Switzerland, where they've got that the giant super collider, the Large Hadron, whatever that thing, right? They're trying to figure out what they call the God particle, for now, right? Because I have a feeling that once they find that thing and they say that's it right there, that in another 100 years somebody with an even bigger gizmo is going to say, no, there's about 18 other little things inside that thing. You just couldn't see them yet. Right? So for us to attempt to nail down where the universe came from, what was before the Big Bang, and try to hang a name on it and put a face on it, it's a little difficult. So the most important thing for us when we go to looking at what is God is what works for me. Who and what is God to me, and can I come to peace with a God of my understanding? One of the things I love about the 12 steps, about being in a 12-step community, is that whole idea behind a higher power and a God of my understanding. You know, it's very egalitarian. You know, we could all have, every last one of us sitting in this room could have a different understanding of God, and we can all be in the same room and all be happy about it, be at peace about it. We don't have to go fight over a pile of rocks somewhere, you know, because my version of God says these prayers over it, and your version of God says those prayers over it, so we need to kill each other about that. That sounds silly, doesn't it? You know, so in unity, we say peace in our time is possible, right? Because when we realize how silly that is, we're onto something, right? So we look at God as principle. We don't look at God as having attributes. We look at God as those attributes. So as Dr. Katie says in her book, God is not intelligent. God is intelligence, right? God doesn't have wisdom. He's not like Solomon sitting on his throne saying, oh, well, let's just cut the baby in half. You know? God is wisdom. God is not loving, although sometimes when our hearts are hurting, it helps us to think of a loving God, like a loving father or parent figure. That's great. But what God is love. Now, this is one of those places where the universe and the way it works and the science of it kind of intersects with my metaphysics. If we say God is love, all right, when we look at what we currently understand to be gravity, right? What is the actual meaning or definition behind gravity? Every particle in the universe is attracted to every other particle. I get that kind of right, more or less? Yeah. Now, the ones that are really, really far apart, the attraction is so small as to be immeasurable. But the working theory that we have to go on is that everything loves everything else. And even though at this moment in time, the universe is still expanding and the rate at which it is expanding is increasing, right? It's all kind of still blowing away from each other, we think, based on the Big Bang, right? And dark matter and all that other good stuff. I don't want to get into that. But at some point, billions, maybe trillions of years down the road, it's probably all going to go back together because it all loves itself and each other, right? And at that point, there's probably going to be another Big Bang and we'll get recycled, right? At least that's, right? And that's kind of, that's one of the current theories, right? But I like this idea that God being love is expressed universally in the physical realm as well as in the metaphysical realm. That kind of, gives me a little bit of peace of mind. It's like, okay, God is love, right? Look around, right? The earth loves me. Sometimes right now loves me a little too much. I've been eating too much since I got home from the desert, right? But God is love. When we say that, when we talk about the powers of God, when I say there's only one presence and one power in the universe in my life, God the good, omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. God is not omniscient. It's not this thing that's all-knowing. God is all knowledge, right? God is not all-powerful. God is all power. God is omnipotence, right? And God isn't everywhere in the terms of like I'm here and now I'm here and now I'm here, right? God is everywhere. He is the everywhereness of everything as opposed to a being in every place. He is the every place that we are expressed out in, right? So omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, those are a couple of the things that we can kind of say our idea of God, at least the one that we teach in Unity, is. All right? God's not a dude hanging out someplace with this really cool computer deciding whether or not to answer our prayers. Amen? All right? So then we have to ask ourselves, well then, what am I? Am I just sort of a tailless thing whose, forebears crawled up out of the ocean, and, next thing I know, we're, driving cars and trying to blow each other up with nuclear weapons? Is that what we are? So, as we look at unity's principles, the first one is that, all things are God. God is everywhere. The second one then becomes, well, it makes sense that God's in me somehow. That doesn't mean that I'm God the way that Bruce was, right? But it means that there is that divine spark in me, that a piece of me, and we call this piece the Christ. Right? If there's a piece of me that is pure good, pure love, and everything that God would push forth into expression. And the way that she explains it is God is, and man, woman, person kind, exists. And from the root words in exist, it's essentially meaning to be pressed forth. That we are, we're kind of like the mold, and, God's substance gets pressed forth. And, mine looks a little different. Oh, wow. Mine looks a little different from Ted's, looks a little different from Miriam's, looks a little different from Carlos's. We all get pressed out into a different mold. I remember when I was a kid, we used to have these little mold things that you could play with, and you buy the plastic flat pieces and the old mold stamps, and you could make things. And it's kind of like that. We're playing with Play-Doh. Everybody ever had the little molds that you make Play-Doh molds, right? God's like the Play-Doh. There's like this universal Play-Doh, and in unity we call that stuff substance, right? So God is that substance that stands under, right? Under, the stance is from stare, the Latin, to stand. So the thing that stands under everything. So we are substance, God's substance pressed forth into individual beings, right? One of the things that Jesus attempted to teach us was that we are, in a way, all brothers and sisters. We are all one human family. When he said, our Father, talking about God again. And this is one of those dichotomies that sometimes bugs people when we're talking about God, is the idea that God can be both immanent, which is that, when I want to say, oh, God, thank you, I'm really grateful for this, or I'm like, wow, God, I'm having a really tough day, I could use some help here, right? If we only think of God as transcendent, which is that universe, everything in it, all that lies behind it, and the laws by which it operates, it's not very comforting to us as little people here on this rock, okay? We're allowed to think of God both ways. We're allowed to do that. I'm allowed to have a God that's right here. That's okay. Now that doesn't mean that, there's in actuality a dude, right, that, has a little window or a little, modem connection into here, and that if I pray just right, I'm going to get what I want. When we pray, what are we trying to change? Are we trying to change God's mind? Thank you. We're trying to change us. Prayer changes us. The idea behind prayer is to bring us into alignment with those universal principles that are love, truth, peace, joy, that are, when we talk about God mind, and even saying God mind is a little anthropomorphic, but we have to use some words, some of our words, to try to figure this thing out, to suss it out, to make sense for us, and to let it affect our lives in a positive way. So what Jesus was talking about was the fact that we are all pressed forth into flesh from the same thing. We're all God's substance pressed into a mold. I'm pressed into a Charles mold. He's pressed into a Steve mold. But at the root of our being, at the Christness of who we are, we're all one. And we're all sisters and brothers and, gender non-conforming siblings, because that stuff doesn't matter. What matters is the thing inside of us that binds us together, that lives through us, that experiences itself. There's an old saying that ends with, and God knows itself in us, right? Sometimes I believe deeply that the reason that we are here is for the consciousness that exists at some level of vibration that it's hard for us. I mean, we're obviously tuned into it because we are conscious, we are aware, right? It's so that can experience all that is. It's kind of like we're all little facets on the eye of a giant thing. And that thing is God consciousness. And again, even using consciousness seems to anthropomorphize God. But we're all in this together because we're all a way that God consciousness both expresses and sees its expression. Does that make sense? Right? So because we're all in this together, because we're all brothers and sisters. It's like when Jesus' followers came to him and said, hey, your mom and your brother showed up. Aren't you going to just go stop what you're doing, go see them? He's like, hey, all these people are my mother and my brothers. All these people. Everybody is. In Unity, we believe that peace in our time is possible, and this is why. It's because there is no other power than God out there. There are going to be places, some of them churches, some of them maybe your aunt or somebody like that who wants to tell you about a devil, right? What we recognize the Satan character in the Bible to be is essentially a representation of the human ego, right? That thing that gets us in trouble. I know my ego gets me in trouble. When I open my mouth and stuff that shouldn't come out comes out, that's ego Charles talking. Now I can say, the devil made me do it. I could say that, but the truth is, it was my own ego that made me do that. It was not Christ Charles talking. That was ego Charles, okay? But it's still all in that big box we call God because I have free will. I can either choose to turn into the truth of who I am, or I can try to do like that, right? Or I can try to pretend that it's not there, and that's hell. When I separate myself from the God of who I am, that's hell. Hell is not some place I'm going to get sent to after I die. I've been to hell. I don't want to go back. We believe that the kingdom of heaven is possible right here, right now. And that's what Jesus told us, right? The kingdom of heaven is among you. It is at hand. When we understand God not as some dude who, might like us, might not, might kill us, might, damn us to eternal fire and stuff, when we stop that silliness and we look at God and we see the God in all things, including our own selves, and sometimes that's the toughest place to see God is when you look in the mirror, and we understand the ramifications of that, we see God in each other, then peace in our time is possible, and we can live together in unity. Thank you.